All right, so we've just sort of finished the main part of the interview, and didn't want to make it too nerdy for the average listener, but I did have a few other questions for Craig. I mean, one thing that you talked about was the hunger during during the cutting phase. I mean, do you sort of learn to embrace that after a while? Because obviously, I've gone through periods where I've tried to, and I'm actually doing it at the moment, tried to decrease body fat. Obviously not to the stage level exactly. And I think that feeling that hunger and knowing that that's actually, because usually most people don't associate hunger as being a good thing. It's like, oh, I'm hungry. I think, first of all, from a general population perspective, being hungry means I just want to eat something. I think from previously being an athlete, being hungry meant that I was probably underfed and not refueling. But from a physique perspective, I think just learning to feel that hunger and think, okay, I'm a little bit hungry. That means that they're most likely, it's probably correlated with there being a deficit there, and therefore I'm sort of doing the right thing. I guess when you're on your level, you've got to take that to a whole new level. And how hard is that to actually do?
Well, I mean, so I think there's a lot of individual variance.
Yeah.
I think that broadly speaking, we can probably split the population into two major groups. The first group is the type that can put on muscle mass really, really easy, but then has a really difficult time losing weight. Then on the other hand, you've got the guys that can cut down super easy, but then have a really, really hard time putting on muscle.
Yeah.
In my case, I'm definitely more of the latter, right?
Yeah.
I have difficulty putting muscle on. In order for me to put muscle on, I mean, my off-season calories get as high as like 6,500 on a big.
Yeah.
So, and like, so 4,500 to 6,500 is my range, right? For like, so I do high, medium, and low days, right? Or my low day would be 4,500 calories, my high day would be 6. And that's for weeks only, right? And that's clean food. That's not cakes and bonbons, right? So
Yeah.
trying to eat that amount of food is a challenge, to say the least.
Yeah.
Especially clean food, chicken and rice. Now, obviously, when I get to lose weight, right, it's very easy for me because I have to consume so many calories anyways that, yes, I get hungry, right, relative to what I'm used to eating. But some words that a coach of mine told me, I can't remember, I think it's my second or third season, was he said that people always look their best when they're a little bit hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I go onto stage, I always ensure that I'm a little bit hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, you do, right? Because in that way, you don't have any sort of like, if you think about how you feel when you've eaten too much versus when you've eaten too little, you're a bit more sort of on edge, a little sharper when you haven't eaten as much. Whereas when you've eaten a little bit too much, you're a bit sort of like groggy, can have just a little bit slower, right? Don't feel quite as sharp. So I think that some of the things that help me to battle with the hunger are, number one, regularly scheduled eating events. I alluded to that when I was talking about the structure of the bodybuilding embrace my life, but knowing that you're going to eat in 90 minutes, in half an hour, cuts it down into digestible chunks. So, you're hungry, you look at the clock, you go, it's 1:30, I'm supposed to eat at 2. I got half an hour, I can do this. I'll go get myself a glass of water or something like that. And that helps. And I've also found that drinking cold water, particularly the ice cold water, helps me a lot. Now, I don't know, psychological, I don't know if there's anything actually physiological to it, but especially ice cold water, I just find it's very easy to drink. And because I can drink the quantity of it that I can, that helps me with my hydration, which I want to keep up anyways. And on top of that, helps me to keep a little bit fuller stomach. Now, of course, when you're on low carbohydrates and you don't have anything that'll absorb that water, that does mean relatively frequent trips to the bathroom, but that's not the end.
Yeah, sure. And the meal frequency is the same whether you're bulking or cutting. Have you experimented with different meal frequency? I know, back in the day, the bodybuilding mantra was that you needed 6 meals a day, to maximize, protein absorption and things like that. Research has suggested maybe that's Yeah, maybe not as important, but do you find that it's more of that sort of that regimen and also hunger maintenance? But I guess when you're eating, trying to fit in 6,500 calories, that you probably it's difficult to do that in three settings.
No,
Settings, yeah,
I mean, it's pretty much impossible, right? Especially if
yeah,
you try to do that with clean food. Because I mean, on on those 6,500 calorie days, for example, I'll be having like um 400 grams of rice, right? Cooked white rice, which is something that's like only a koplichi, right?
yeah,
That's like that's a proper serving of rice, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you've got that, and in addition to that, like 500 mils of like orange juice or something like that, like some
Yep.
sort of fruit juice. Having that amount of carbohydrate every 3 hours, 2 to 3 to 2.5 to 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
So that's not like, I mean, most people when they go to Coco Beach and eat one, they're kind of like pretty full.
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine stuffing six of those in a day. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not,
Have-
but yeah, the frequency thing, I think that in the context of, so I think that what science is very good at is establishing baselines or general sort of guidelines for most people.
Yeah.
As a bodybuilder, you are not trying to be most people.
Yeah.
You're trying to be over here
Yeah.
on the distribution.
Yeah.
So because you're aiming for that very, very small tail, the distribution,
Yeah.
you really need to do everything. This is where that whole thing about making whatever a 1% difference every day,
Yeah.
winds up having a big impact over time.
Yeah.
And so although it might not be statistically significant to the point that you can show it in academic research, right? I do think that it is still, and the reason why I say that, or the evidence that I have for that, is when you look at the people who are at the upper echelons, they are doing it, right? So it's success leaving clues. I just think that a lot of the times these things are hard to prove in the context of a scientific study.
Sure.
So,
Sufficiently.
yeah, I think that, the greatest scientific experiments that have been conducted from a bodybuilding perspective have been in the gyms on bodybuilding stages for the last 50 years. It's just, it hasn't been done by people in a controlled environment.
No, that makes sense. Have you tried trying to get some of those calories in with more calorie dense foods? Yeah. Have you done the sort of cakes and bonbons approach, and how negatively has that impacted on your training quality?
Sure. So, I mean, I've literally done everything from intermittent fasting, where I would have like 2 meals a day, to the whole 6 meal, like, bro science approach, we call it, right?
Yep.
Um, the the things that I have noticed is the more consistent feedings keeps the energy levels more consistent throughout the day. There's no spiking, there's no extreme hunger, there's no extreme fullness, right?
Yep.
So everything is just more consistent.
Yep.
And the body likes homeostasis,
Yep.
right? So I think the body is very comfortable when there is that sort of consistency. Now, that said, that's kind of, a lot of the things we talk about in bodybuilding is always trying to change things up to keep the body guessing, whether it's in terms of training stimulus or, for example, I myself use a carbohydrate cycling approach, right? So by definition, my body doesn't know if I'm going to have a low carbohydrate, high carbohydrate. Manipulations like that are key, and they're what helps our bodies to change. But at the end of the day, they do still want some semblance of homeostasis. So I think that, the more that you can try to keep it comfortable, the better. And I think that more frequent feedings allows the body to feel more comfortable.
Yeah, sure.
Totally subjective opinion, I understand. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like that is not, but that's just been my experience with it.
yeah, yeah. What's your weight fluctuation like between sort of stage day and peak off season?
Sure. So I would say that like a typical stage to stage progression for me would look something like on show day, I'll be, so to put like concrete numbers on it, Um, I believe that I was 76 kilos on stage day in 2019, which was November 2019, the Olympics. I think I was 76 kilos on stage. Then within 2 weeks after that, my body weight had jumped up to about 82, 83. Right. So like literally within a week or so. And a lot of that is the glycogen going back into the muscles, water coming back in, more food in the stomach, right? Things like that. Then from that point, the analogy that I like to use in that case is it's like if you have a ball and a big tub of water and you hold the ball underwater and then finally take your hand off it, it pops up.
Yeah.
It goes a little bit fast. And then so that's kind of what happens immediately after. And then after that, you know, I'll generally, when things stabilize, try to hold things for a few weeks, maybe 6 weeks, something like that, just to kind of, you know, feel a bit healthier, for lack of a better expression. Just enjoy not having to feel like it's a Herculean effort to take every single step. And hold it for about 6 weeks. And then after that, I'll start to try to push my body weight up. When I start pushing the body weight up, that will just sort of progress over the course of the season. So I peaked not last year. I peaked in 2020 at 100 kilograms. So that was 24, I guess, from 76. And then the next time I got on stage, I was 80. So, so I, net, I put on 4 kilograms, but it was a 26 kilogram gain followed.
And so, and that was the same body fat levels.
More or less. I mean, it's stage condition, right? So it's I think that. So in 2019, I think that I was a bit over dieted for the show. And I was a bit stringy. So that wasn't great. I had a hard time carving up, but for this show, the most recent ones that I've done last year, I think that I did a better job of managing that. So I think my body fat levels may have been the same, but the water retention that I was holding like inside the muscle might have actually been a little bit better this show. So that might explain some of the
that was sort of where I was going to go with the next question was in terms of fluid manipulation. What have you sort of experimented with that in terms of, I guess the idea is to try and transfer that extracellular to intracellular sort of water content to give the muscles that full sensation or full appearance. Have you sort of experimented with different fluid manipulation strategies and what sort of works well for you?
Yes. So there's 2 major protocols. I'm actually confident that both of them work well. And they're both pretty good. The one that I find easiest to implement is water loading and then shutting off, right? So what that involves is basically, so I generally drink about 4 to 5 liters of water a day anyways. And then, in the last week, I will take that up to 10 liters, right? And drinking 10 liters a day is as bad as it sounds. I mean, especially because at that point you're on pretty low carbohydrates too. So, I mean, everything just runs right through it. It's literally every 90 minutes you're running the washroom, but day and night. So you load the water out that and then shut it off at say like 7 p.m. the night before the show. And then what you've done is you've coaxed your body into thinking that water intake is going to continue to come in. And it continues to excrete water at the same pace. So you'll still be going to the bathroom even though you're not drinking. And then you'll wake up in the morning nice and crisp. Okay. So that way it works really well. And I find that quite easy to do. The other approach is more of a tapering approach where you go directly to So what I did is from 2 weeks out, I was drinking 8 liters of water. And then in the last 3 days, we tapered that down to 6 to 4, right? And then shut it off the next 4.
Okay.
And that had the same net effect. But I think that maybe that's why I was able to retain a little bit better water intramuscularly, but I still lost all of the subcutaneous. So, it was, both approaches work. The one thing that I would say is that I have never manipulated potassium or sodium.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
I have been, the old thinking was, of course, that, particularly sodium, because it retains water, that it was undesirable. But recently they have found, that in fact, the sodium is what keeps the, water inside your muscle as opposed to subcutaneous. So, so in order to have full muscles, with a lack of subcutaneous water, it's actually best to keep the salt in. And, like heading right, like just before we get onto the stage, the last minute, manipulations and sort of like the last 2 days, right? Particularly on the last day, when you're just about to go on stage, you have to, like, some people, so there's a thing called spilling, right? Where if you've carved up too much, there's a chance that you'll lose conditioning because your body will start to relax a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have like carbs come in, et cetera, and you'll just retain extra water, and it's not a good look. So basically, if that happens, you have to try to out-train that in the back with popping up and stuff, which is pretty like last ditch effort. On the other hand, sometimes you can look flat, right? And if you're looking flat, sometimes, and if you're looking sort of flat, if you're looking full and flabby, that's spilling. If you're looking flat and flabby, then quite often that can be your sodium levels have dropped too much. Right? So if you take some sodium and then have a bit of like carbohydrate drink or something like that, and do some pumping up, then you can actually recover your conditioning from when you're like flat and flabby, right?
Yeah.
And then you can get, once the muscles full back up, then the skin will start to stretch around the muscle that you've got, and you'll get conditioning back. So But in terms of the major protocols, there's the water loading. Those last minute manipulations are like, that's an art and a science.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's very, like you said, art and a science, and very fascinating. Just a couple more questions. So, talked right at the start how your initial strength training was sort of focused around the big three, but you found like you weren't really gaining size, and obviously you felt like that was a lot to do with or had a part to do with the nutrition. How much of it was also, obviously, when you're training to maximize your strength with those, you're almost training for efficiency. Whereas when you're trying to actually apply a specific stimulus to promote an hypertrophic adaptation, it's more about actually decreasing the efficiency so that the muscles working harder. Did you sort of, because you've still talked about PRing in big compound movements, did you change the way that you were performing those compound movements with focus? And the other part of that too is there's, with the focus on exercise, from a strength and conditioning point of view, there's a lot of focus on external cueing and external stimuli to, like I said, improve efficiency and improve output with that particular movement, whether it be resistance training or whether it be a jump or a sprint. Whereas bodybuilding's had this more sort of mind-muscle connection, more internal cues. I've also sort of read recently that there's now it's more of a theory that some of that internal cueing can actually be detrimental because you're encouraging co-contraction. So say if you're doing a biceps curl and you're really focused on the biceps, that intense focus will actually induce some excessive antagonist triceps activation, which will then decrease the amount of load that can be put on the biceps. There's a million questions there. So I guess starting with the movements, how did you sort of change your approach to performing compound movements?
Okay, so I think the major difference was like more about the major compound lifts. I still try to progress, right?
Yeah,
but that is one set. Right?
Yeah.
That is not. That's not like 5 by 5, and that's all I did. Right.
Yeah.
Like I still remember like the mantra of the day was, you don't need accessory work, right? If you're doing the big lifts, right? Because your arms will grow a lot, as your bench press gets bigger, stuff like this. So, and that's just garbage.
Well, it doesn't make sense physiologically. I mean, if you're doing a compound movement, there must be something that's a weak link. So you need to, isolate that.
But it's like, you're not going to build bodybuilder arms by not training, right?
Yeah.
But still, that was sort of what was the prevailing wisdom at the time for sort of, elementary or intermediate trainings, was that the accessory work wasn't quite as required. So, the focus on the strength training, was really just sort of get big and jacked first and then worry about the stuff after. But that said, once I got past that sort of initial strength thing, then it was like, okay, how do I use this in a bodybuilding context, right? And so the bodybuilding context was very much like, although it's important to do these big lifts, what's actually more important is, you go and you do your big lifts and you go for your PRs, but then after that, you try to, as I was saying, drive as much blood into the muscles as possible, right?
Yeah.
So I actually find that my training style continues to evolve even today. And I'm actually headed to Canada to go train with this guy who's hilarious. I don't know if you've ever seen Big Mike Van Wyck on Instagram, but he's this big burly Canadian bodybuilder guy. And what he says from a training perspective, especially because I just injured myself, makes a lot of sense, right? And he's sort of been preaching at least what I've been hearing, which is why I want to go check it out, right? But what I've been hearing is that a lot of the times, when people set up, even to do an isolation, like, so say for example, leg extensions, right? A lot of the leg extension machine, a lot of times people will, clamp down really hard and almost get their whole body into it just to get the movement, to get the movement going, right? Yeah. Whereas what he's trying to do, it seems to me, is relax everything except the muscle that you train.
Yep.
So I find that, like, I did this with a friend the other day on hack squats. And, when you go in there, of course, you can bear down, tense everything up, and just beast it with hack squats, right? Or you can try to keep absolutely everything loose, the pressure in your hips and on your feet on the platform, and just drive the movement using your quads.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different experience and a completely different sensation, right? So, I think that, there's the big, it's a combination of the two that works the best. It's like, you have to have the all out heavy training, but by the same token, you've also got to have these things where you're just trying to, I don't know if it's necessarily connect with the muscle, but just ensure that you're working the right muscles and not inadvertently working something that you're not trying to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And just another one with the compound movements, you say you sort of continue to try and PR even when you're cutting. Do you find that it affects different movements differently? Because I know a lot of people report when they start losing mass that the bench press is affected more, because it's almost like a mechanic. You lose leverage because if you're losing some of that weight from the hips and from your butt, you're almost just changing the mechanics of the movement a little. I've sort of found that myself. And even, so probably the squat more than the deadlift, because when you're squatting, if you've got just more tissue, more stuff around the knees and hips, you're almost getting a little bit of spring that contributes to the movement. Do you sort of find that the deadlift's probably least affected than everything else?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, the one that I was PRing was the deadlift. So.
Yeah.
Fair point. But the bench press, I think I deloaded once last prep. So, it wasn't really significant in terms of like, how much strength I lost.
Yeah.
I would say that by the end of the program, even with the deload, I was still sort of at the levels that I was at. So, my bench sucks. So, know if that means anything.
Yeah. And then just one last one. So for me personally, if someone has an injury on one side of the body, I always have them train everything that they can, including the other side. We have some research that we have this cross-education phenomenon where you train one side We don't have it, the research in injured populations, because it's really difficult to do that study. But, we've had several studies where someone has been casted or braced for 3 or 4 weeks, have trained the opposite side, a control group has lost muscle mass, the intervention group has actually gained strength and maintained muscle mass. People will obviously say, but what happens if I get too strong on my other side? First of all, most people, if I'm training, the average 45-year-old accountant that comes in and they've injured their, you're not the average, but that comes in injured their ACL skiing, they're not going to gain that massive amount of muscle mass on one side. And even if they do, the way I put it is, your body wants to achieve homeostasis. So it might take a little bit of time, but the injured side will catch up over time. And you're much better off still trying to get stronger on your uninjured side, maintain as much as you can on the injured side, and let that catch up. Now, and the same is true. I say, average of 45-year-old accountant, even elite athletes. I still think that is a valid strategy. However, bodybuilding, because there's such a focus on symmetry, and because there's probably more of a window for the hypertrophy to occur in the non-injured side. How much is that a consideration for you when you're injured on one side, training the other side?
Well, so, I mean, in terms of the approach that I've taken this time, number one, it has been absolutely, I've been training the uninjured side as intensely as possible, right? Obviously, in the first couple of weeks when the pain was really, really bad, it was hard to do much, but still getting in there and trying to find some way to move my sling to the side while I got some rows in or whatever with the uninjured side was something that I was pretty diligent about. And then training legs, just trying to keep the whole body trained, basically.
Yeah.
My experience with my ACL was that as I mentioned, when I got on stage, the size difference between the two legs was pretty noticeable. I would say that I probably 2/3 the mass in my left leg that I did in my right.
Yeah.
So that was, it was pretty bad. But that said, a year later, they now look the same size. And I'm pretty sure that, they look the same size now, and I know they certainly do. And I've actually gained from that point as well. My legs are better than they were.
Yeah.
So, I think that, if you do have that situation where you train the one side as opposed to the other one while the other one's injured, I think that it's just sort of like, I don't know, I feel like you can still continue to progress the one side. The other side may lag, but eventually, especially once you start to incorporate like bilateral movements in together and stuff, right?
Mm.
Like your body kind of is forced to balance itself out if you're doing I'm not doing anything but I'm not doing free weight bench press yet, or dumbbell bench press, right? If you're using like a machine-based bench press, right? And you're concentrating on trying to drive the movement with your injured arm, right?
Mm.
Or healing arm, right? Eventually feels to me like it's going to even out itself.
Yeah.
Where I'll be moving both and they'll be moving into 10 and they'll be to, press with equal exertion on both sides. Right.
Yeah.
But, may just not be there yet. But, I absolutely think that you should. And as you mentioned, there is good research that supports it as well. From a bodybuilding context, I think that it's just the time span is going to be longer than if you had just a regular athlete. And that is because of the aesthetics. You need the muscle size to actually come back.
Right? Yes. Yeah.
They always talk about the concept of muscle memory in bodybuilding.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which is actually the correct use of the term muscle memory, because people say, "Oh, it was muscle memory. I got on my bike. I was playing soccer, and I just knew what to do." And whereas, as your muscle memory refers to like satellite cells and the architecture of the muscle that's built up and makes it easier for that muscle to rebound.
So it should come back more quickly. And when I look at, there's another guy that I know that had shoulder surgery and similarly was 12 weeks without training, but was training his one side or his uninjured side. And then he's had full clearance to train for the past 3 months, I want to say. And now his operated side actually looks as good, if not better, than his other side. So And I think that's just, everything is just kind of caught up, but I think it just takes a little extra time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not, I wouldn't be worried about building a massive imbalance on one side or the other as a function of, 3 to 6 months of rehab type training.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, we've gone way over time, and I really appreciate your time. We could talk all day about training. I know you're passionate about it.
Yeah.
So thanks very much again, Craig, and we'll maybe get you back on again, and we can geek out a little more.
Sounds great. Anytime.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.